The complete military history of Israel, from survival to superpower. The year is 1948. Across the deserts of the Middle East, a newborn nation stands surrounded by enemies. Its army barely exists. Its weapons are outdated, improvised, and desperately scarce. Many of its soldiers are Holocaust survivors who had escaped one catastrophe only to walk directly into another. And yet, against all expectations, this tiny state survives. Over the next 75 years, that same nation would transform itself into one of the most technologically advanced military powers on Earth. A country smaller than New Jersey would develop nuclear ambiguity, cyber warfare dominance, elite intelligence agencies, drone supremacy, missile defense systems once thought impossible, and one of the most battle-tested militaries in modern history. But Israel's military story is not simply about tanks, jets, or victories. It is a story shaped by trauma, by geography, by fear, and by a permanent sense that history could collapse at any moment. Because for Israel, war was never far away. This is the complete military history of Israel. Conclusion: the price of survival. The military history of Israel is ultimately a story about what happens when a nation believes survival is never guaranteed. That belief created extraordinary resilience. It drove innovation, intelligence mastery, and military adaptation at a pace few countries have ever matched. But it also created a society permanently shaped by conflict. Generation after generation grew up under mobilization, sirens, checkpoints, rockets, and war memories. And perhaps that is the deepest paradox of Israeli power. The stronger the military became, the more elusive true security often seemed. Because military superiority can destroy armies, it can intercept missiles, it can dominate battlefields. But history repeatedly shows that power alone rarely resolves the fears, identities, and grievances that fuel conflict in the first place. And so, as the Middle East moves deeper into the 21st century, Israel stands as both a warning and a lesson. A nation forged by catastrophe, strengthened by constant war, transformed into a military superpower through necessity, yet still searching for something every fortress eventually seeks, a future where survival no longer depends on the next battle. Chapter 1. Before Israel. The birth of armed Zionism. Long before the State of Israel existed, the foundations of its military culture were already being built. In the late 19th century, political Zionism emerged in Europe. Its goal was radical for its time, the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. But the movement developed in a world shaped by pogroms, persecution, and rising nationalism. Many early Zionists concluded that survival required something Jews had lacked for centuries: military power. Under Ottoman rule and later under the British Mandate after World War I, Jewish settlers in Palestine began organizing self-defense groups. The first major organization was Hashema, small, poorly armed, rural. But it established a critical idea: Jewish communities would defend themselves rather than rely on outside protection. Then came the riots of the 1920s and 1930s. Arab-Jewish violence intensified. The British struggled to maintain control. In response, the Jewish community formed the Haganah. At first, it was a defensive militia, but over time it evolved into a disciplined underground army with intelligence networks, logistics systems, covert arms smuggling, and military training programs. And from within the Haganah emerged even more radical factions: the Irgun, Lehi, organizations willing to use bombings, assassinations, and insurgent tactics against both Arab militants and British authorities. By the 1940s, Palestine had become a powder keg. Then came the Holocaust, 6 million Jews murdered across Europe. The scale of the atrocity fundamentally reshaped global politics and intensified demands for a Jewish state. For many survivors, military weakness had become synonymous with extinction. Never again would become more than a slogan. It became doctrine. And in 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. The moment the decision was announced, the countdown to war began. Chapter 2, 1948. The War of Independence. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of Israel. Within hours, neighboring Arab armies invaded Egypt from the south, Jordan from the east, Syria from the north, Iraq and Lebanon joining the assault. Israel's situation was catastrophic. The new country had roughly 35,000 fighters. Many lacked proper uniforms, heavy weapons were limited, aircraft were almost non-existent. Some soldiers trained with wooden rifles because there were not enough real ones. And yet, despite overwhelming odds, the Israelis possessed several advantages. First, organization. The Haganah rapidly transformed into the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. Second, motivation. For many Israelis, defeat did not mean political loss. It meant annihilation. And third, adaptability. Israel relied on speed, improvisation, and decentralized command structures. Local commanders often made independent battlefield decisions without waiting for approval. This flexibility became a defining characteristic of Israeli warfare. The war itself was brutal. Jerusalem became divided and besieged. Convoys were ambushed in narrow mountain roads. Urban fighting erupted across mixed cities. Meanwhile, the fledgling Israeli Air Force was assembling aircraft from wherever it could find them. Some planes were smuggled in pieces, some were leftover World War II fighters, some barely functioned, but they were enough. By early 1949, Israel had survived and expanded beyond the original UN partition borders. The Arab states failed to destroy the new nation. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians became refugees in what Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe, and Israel emerged with a military lesson that would define its future. It could never afford to lose a war, not even once. Chapter 3, Between Wars, Building a Fortress, State. The years after 1948 were filled with tension, border infiltrations, retaliatory raids, regional hostility. Israel existed in a permanent state of mobilization. Unlike larger powers, it lacked strategic depth. At its narrowest point, the country was only about 15 kilometers wide. An enemy breakthrough could split the nation in half. So Israel built its military around speed and reserve mobilization. Most citizens would become soldiers, and most soldiers would remain reservists for decades. This created an unusual society where civilian life and military life constantly overlapped. Meanwhile, Israel's intelligence culture expanded rapidly. The Mossad, Amman, Shin Bet. These organizations became central pillars of national survival. Covert operations, assassinations, espionage, sabotage. Israel embraced intelligence warfare as aggressively as conventional warfare. Then in 1956 came the Suez Crisis. Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the Suez Canal and blocked Israeli shipping. In response, Israel secretly coordinated with Britain and France. Israeli forces stormed into the Sinai Peninsula with shocking speed. Paratroopers descended deep behind enemy lines. Armored units raced through the desert. The operation demonstrated something new. Israel was no longer simply surviving, it was becoming offensively dangerous. But international pressure, especially from the United States and Soviet Union, forced Israel to withdraw. And the lesson was clear. Military victories alone could not guarantee strategic success. Chapter 4. 1967, the Six-Day War. By the spring of 1967, the Middle East stood on the edge of catastrophe. Arab armies mobilized. Egypt expelled UN peacekeepers from Sinai. Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran. Across Israel, fear spread rapidly. Mass graves were prepared in public parks. Many Israelis believed another genocide was coming. Then, on June 5th, Israel struck first, Operation Focus. In one of the most devastating air campaigns in military history, Israeli jets flew low across the Mediterranean to avoid radar detection before destroying Egypt's air force on the ground. Runways shattered, aircraft burned in rows. Within hours, Israel achieved near-total air superiority. Then the ground offensives began. Israeli armored divisions surged across Sinai. Jordanian positions collapsed in Jerusalem and the West Bank. Syrian defenses on the Golan Heights fell after fierce fighting. And in just 6 days, the map of the Middle East changed forever. Israel captured Sinai from Egypt. The the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Golan Heights from Syria, and Gaza. The victory stunned the world. A tiny nation had defeated multiple armies in under a week, but the triumph created new dilemmas. Israel now controlled millions of Palestinians. Occupation became a central issue in regional politics. And militarily, the victory planted dangerous assumptions. Many Israelis began believing the IDF was nearly invincible. History would soon punish that confidence. Chapter 5, 1973. The Yom Kippur War, on October 6, 1973. The holiest day in Judaism, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack. Israeli defenses were unprepared. Many soldiers were home observing Yom Kippur. In the Sinai, Egyptian forces crossed the Suez Canal under massive artillery cover. On the Golan Heights, Syrian tanks poured through defensive lines. For the first time since 1948, Israel faced the possibility of catastrophic defeat. Israeli casualties mounted rapidly. Entire units were overwhelmed. The psychological shock was enormous. The myth of IDF invincibility shattered almost overnight. But then came the counterattack. Israeli reserve mobilization, one of the fastest in history, swung into motion. Tank battles erupted across Sinai and the Golan. Fighter jets fought desperately against Soviet-made surface-to-air missile networks. Eventually, Israeli forces pushed Syrian armies back and crossed the Suez Canal into Egypt itself. Militarily, Israel recovered, but strategically, the war changed everything. The conflict exposed vulnerabilities in Israeli intelligence. It proved technology alone could not guarantee security. And it accelerated American military support on a massive scale. From this point onward, the US-Israel military relationship deepened dramatically. American aircraft, American tanks, American funding. Israel increasingly became Washington's most powerful regional ally. And at the same time, the IDF entered a new technological era. Chapter 6: Lebanon, Insurgency and Urban Warfare. The next phase of Israeli military history was no longer dominated by traditional state armies. Instead, it became a struggle against insurgencies, militias, and asymmetric warfare. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to destroy the Palestine Liberation Organization. At first, the operation moved rapidly. Israeli armor advanced north toward Beirut, but Lebanon became a trap. Urban warfare, sectarian chaos, guerrilla attacks. The conflict dragged on for years, and out of that chaos emerged Hezbollah. Backed heavily by Iran, Hezbollah developed into one of the most sophisticated non-state military organizations in the world. Rocket warfare, tunnel systems, anti-tank missiles, hybrid tactics. Israel suddenly faced enemies that could not easily be defeated through conventional military superiority. Meanwhile, the Palestinian uprisings, the First and Second Intifadas, transformed Israeli security doctrine even further. The IDF adapted for counterinsurgency operations. Checkpoint systems expanded, special forces raids intensified, surveillance technologies became deeply integrated into civilian monitoring. The battlefield was no longer only deserts and borders. Now it included crowded cities, refugee camps, apartment blocks, and underground networks. And this environment would shape the future of Israeli warfare more than any tank battle ever could. Chapter 7: The Rise of Israeli Military Technology. As the 21st century approached, Israel invested heavily in something more valuable than population size: technology. Unable to match regional demographics, Israel pursued qualitative superiority instead. Its defense industry exploded in capability. Companies like Israel Aerospace Industries, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, and Elbit Systems became global defense giants. Israel pioneered drone warfare long before many major powers fully understood its significance. Its UAV systems reshaped reconnaissance and precision strike operations worldwide. Then came missile defense. For decades, rockets from Gaza and Lebanon threatened Israeli cities, but Israel responded with layered defense systems unlike anything else on Earth. Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow. Using radar tracking and predictive interception algorithms, Iron Dome calculated which incoming rockets threatened populated areas and ignored those projected to land harmlessly. The system changed the strategic balance of rocket warfare. Meanwhile, Israeli cyber capabilities expanded dramatically. Unit 8200 became legendary within intelligence circles, cyber espionage, electronic warfare, signals intelligence. Israel became one of the world's premier digital military powers. By the 2000s, Israel had evolved into something extraordinary, a small nation operating at the cutting edge of 21st century warfare. Chapter 8, Gaza, Regional Conflict, and the Shadow War. The modern era of Israeli warfare became increasingly fragmented and continuous. There was no final peace, no decisive ending. Instead, there were cycles, rocket attacks, airstrikes, targeted assassinations, ceasefires, then escalation again. Conflicts with Hamas in Gaza intensified repeatedly, especially in 2008, 2014, 2021, and beyond. Urban combat and civilian casualties generated enormous international controversy. At the same time, Israel conducted a far quieter war across the region, a shadow war against Iran. Israeli intelligence operations allegedly targeted Iranian nuclear scientists, missile programs, weapons convoys, and cyber infrastructure. The conflict rarely became fully open, but it shaped Middle Eastern geopolitics behind the scenes. Meanwhile, normalization agreements with several Arab states under the Abraham Accords suggested the regional landscape was shifting. Old enemies were becoming strategic partners against common threats. But the underlying instability remained. And then came October 7, 2023. Hamas launched one of the deadliest attacks in Israeli history. Militants breached border defenses, attacked communities, and killed civilians and soldiers in shocking numbers. For Israel, the attack represented a massive intelligence and security failure. The psychological trauma echoed memories from 1973. Israel responded with overwhelming military force in Gaza. The war rapidly became one of the most globally scrutinized conflicts of the modern era. Questions about urban warfare, civilian protection, hostages, regional escalation, and international law dominated headlines worldwide. And once again, Israel confronted the same dilemma that had haunted it since 1948. How does a nation built around survival fight enemies embedded within civilian environments without becoming trapped in endless war? Chapter 9. Israel's military power in 2025. By 2025, Israel possesses one of the most capable militaries on Earth. Its active personnel numbers are relatively modest compared to global giants, but its readiness, reserve system, intelligence integration, and technological sophistication make it disproportionately powerful. The Israeli Air Force remains among the world's elite. F-35 stealth fighters operate alongside advanced drones and electronic warfare systems. The Navy protects offshore energy infrastructure in the Mediterranean. Special forces units conduct operations few governments publicly acknowledge. Meanwhile, Israel's defense exports influence militaries across the globe. Drone systems, cybersecurity tools, missile defense technology, AI-assisted battlefield systems. Modern Israeli military doctrine increasingly combines real-time surveillance, artificial intelligence, precision strikes, and network-centric warfare. And behind everything remains the unspoken dimension, nuclear ambiguity. Israel has never officially confirmed possessing nuclear weapons, but few doubt the existence of a strategic deterrent developed over decades. For supporters, Israel represents one of history's greatest survival stories, a nation repeatedly threatened with destruction that transformed itself into a technological and military powerhouse. For critics, Israel's military dominance is inseparable from occupation, displacement, and cycles of regional violence. Both realities coexist, and that tension defines much of the modern Middle East.